This program is made possible through the generous support of Butler County, Holly Frontier, and the Butler County Historical Society, home of the Kansas Oil Museum.
Welcome to Kansas Crossroads. In this episode, we explore the story of Augusta. Situated at the confluence of the Whitewater and Walnut Rivers, Augusta, like many other Butler County communities, got its start shortly after the Civil War.
Augusta was incorporated in 1868 and founded in 1871. It had its earliest beginnings with the false starts of Arizonia and Fontenelle, when settlers attempted to make claims, but soon learned the land was still part of Osage territory.
So join us as we explore the story of Augusta. The Osage were known as the people of the Middle Waters. By the middle of the 19th century, they were being encroached upon on several sides. Native Americans from the southeastern part of the United States were brought through the Indian Removal Acts. Settlers were coming from the east to the west and encroaching from Missouri and Kansas territory, later Kansas. And so they had to fight for their existence. The missionary Isaac McCoy referred to the Osage as uncommonly fierce, courageous, and warlike people. By the 1870s, the Osage were relocated to a reservation in present-day northeastern Oklahoma, where their reservation is to this day.
And in the 1850s, there was a treaty between the Osage and the U.S. government that gave that land up for purchase. And so the Osage actually were moved to a reservation in northern Oklahoma, and that land was available for purchase for settlers and pioneers to come in. And William Schemleffer and C.N. James were looking for a place to start a trading post. They had already established one in Council Grove, and so they were looking for another place, and they heard about this land that was available in the Butler County area. And so they came and they purchased 80 acres for $40, and they built a trading post. And William's brother Leonard was there to help, and there was another man close by that helped in the construction. They went to the river and cut down some cottonwood trees to build the trading post. The trading post served as a school, it served as church, and it served as the post office. C and James stayed to run the post office and kind of get the affairs in order of the trading post. William Schemleffer moved on to start some other trading posts around Kansas. But C and James and his wife stayed behind. And they hired a school teacher named Ellen Blood. And he also, the trading post was also a stage stop. And so Ellen Blood would stay, and he would kind of run the stage stop as well as the school. And then they decided that they needed a post office because the town was just starting to grow, and there were too many people that were coming to get their mail, and they needed a separate post office. But in order to do that, they needed a name for the town. And so there was a man that had a hotel across the street, and he said, well, let's name it after my wife, Henrietta. And C and James said, well, why don't we name it after my wife, Augusta? And so they couldn't decide, and so they said, okay, let's put it to a vote. And the Jameses were loved by everyone, and so it was no big surprise that the town chose Augusta, so named after C and James's wife.
The land office came to us from Humboldt, and so we had a land office that set up business in the 400 block of State Street, and they were very busy. There were people coming from all over. They were coming by foot, in wagon trains. They were just loading into Augusta. And so we were very busy, and people were having to wait for days to get their time in front of the agent. They only stayed for about 16 months, and then the land office moved to Wichita.
As we explore the origin story of Augusta, we will also explore what happened between El Dorado and Augusta in the 1870s with the courthouse wars. In the early years of Butler County, the county seat changed frequently. Within a span of 6 years, 1864 to 1870, a county seat vote was called at least 3 times between Chelsea and El Dorado. In the early 1870s, Augusta, with the support of Douglas, petitioned the county commissioners for county seat to be moved to Augusta. While considering the petition, a legal question was raised as to whom were the legal petitioners. Augusta felt that a signer did not have to be a legal voter at the time of signing the petition. El Dorado's attorney stated that only legal electors be permitted to sign. The back and forth between the town's attorneys and the county board was eventually sent to the Attorney General for a final decision. Instead of waiting for feedback and delaying the vote, Augusta requested the vote to proceed. A vote was held, and it appeared that Augusta had the lead. Before the vote was completed, the county board was met with an injunction issued by El Dorado. The case was quickly heard, and a judge dissolved the injunction. El Dorado then moved to appeal the decision to the Supreme Court. The county board called a meeting where Augusta demanded to proceed with counting the vote, but attorneys warned the county they would be in contempt if they did. Early returns reflected a win by Augusta, and the town demanded immediate removal of the county seat. The tension began to mount as the county sheriff locked the courthouse, seemingly impossible to enter. El Dorado officials, concerned that Augusta might attempt to forcibly seize the records, successfully removed the sheriff's lock with the assistance of a 15-foot elm joist. Next step was protecting what El Dorado felt was theirs. With the assistance of Union veteran Brigadier General A.W. Ellett, the El Dorado group begins to barricade the courthouse until the general stated a regiment couldn't take it without artillery. A day later, a group from Augusta did arrive with ox wagons prepared to load safes and records. The Augusta group were met by 12 armed men, some at the courthouse and a few on a nearby roof. A group of approximately 50 men gathered inside another building. Eventually, the adversarial groups dispersed after a speech on the courthouse steps by a man named Colonel T.H. Baker. In the end, the Supreme Court hands down a decision upholding El Dorado's contention that the election was illegally held. El Dorado maintained the county seat.
There were people in Augusta that were absolutely in favor of the courthouse being here in Augusta, and they had a vote. The vote was taken. It was determined by Augustans that Augusta had won, and then for whatever reason, El Dorado was declared the winner. And so it even went to the state for the state to make the decision who was the winner of the courthouse, and it was determined that El Dorado was, based on a fault or a default of Augustans not meeting a time frame that they needed to meet. So we lost the courthouse, and so we've lost the land office and now the courthouse. And then it was 1874, and it was in August, and a huge swarm of grasshoppers came from the west and just began to eat up all of the green. There was corn in the fields. They ate everything except onions. They didn't eat the onions, and they even ate the wood out of the water trough. And we even have a spoon that one of the husbands, actually cut the wood from what was left of that water trough. So there were a lot of things that happened at that time, and Augustans and the people in the surrounding area were just devastated. Their food supply was gone, and one of the business owners downtown in the 400 block, his name was Ettinson. he came from New York, and he went back to his friends in New York, and he begged them for food for Augustans and for the people of Butler County. And they sent food and supplies. And when they got here, he handed out those supplies from the front porch of his store, and his wife handed them out from the back porch of the store so that Augustans could make it through that winter. And they still struggled into the next year, but after that, things started to look a little bit better for them. So anyway, those were some really, really trying times for Augustans in the very beginning. There was just a sense of perseverance. They were hanging on no matter what. And it wasn't just like Mr. Ettinson. There were farmers that they were going to make it work. There were the Haynes family that came from Rose Hill.
John and Mary Haynes arrived in Butler County in the early 1870s, assisting in the creation of Rose Hill. Mary Haynes established a school and became a teacher to the growing settlement. By 1880, the Haynes family moved to Augusta, and it is here where Mary begins a new journey, one of suffrage and temperance. Mary becomes one of the foremost women leaders of Kansas in women's suffrage and temperance activities. Her list of accomplishments is great. She was the organizer of the Augusta Women Christian Temperance Union, state organizer for the Women's Suffrage Club, and president of the Butler County Equal Suffrage Association. By the time of her death in 1913, she was known as a writer, lecturer, and organizer, not just in Kansas, but other states as well.
Mrs. Haynes wanted to live somewhere where they could be a part of something new, something that was good and strong. And they chose Augusta, and they were Augustans until they died. One of them eventually became the bank president. They were important. Mrs. Haynes was very important to the Temperance Union in the state of Kansas, and her daughter went on to be a representative for the state, one of the first women to be. So there was just a sense of perseverance and that stick-to-itiveness that mattered to Augustans. They just hung in there.
Augusta had many interesting residents over the years. Like other Butler County towns, it was peopled by a large amount of Civil War veterans who, using the Homestead Act, made claims in the decades immediately following the war. One of the more unique veterans was William Chisman. Chisman is one of 2 Butler County residents who received the Medal of Honor. Chisman was a member of the 83rd Indiana Infantry. The unit saw a tremendous amount of action, but Chisman's heroic moment occurred in May of 1863 as the Union Army sieged Vicksburg, Mississippi. General Ulysses Grant, in command, asked for volunteers to go on a storming party. This lead element would cross a moat to establish a foothold or create an approach for the rest of the army to follow into the city. The casualties would be extremely high. Grant only accepted single men as volunteers. Twice as many volunteered as were needed, and Chisman was one of those who accepted the challenge. Over 50% were killed in the raid and many more wounded. Chisman survived, and after returning home to Indiana after the war, he soon made his way to Augusta, Kansas. He was presented with the Medal of Honor in 1894 and died in 1925 in Augusta.
The Wichita Natural Gas Company, a subsidiary of City Service, entered the scene in Butler County searching for gas and oil, but primarily gas. Gas was the major source for households and businesses for heating and lighting. Wichita Natural Gas found enough gas in the area to support Augusta. It also happened upon an additional find, oil. The very first productive oil well was brought in on the Varner lease 7 miles southwest of Augusta on March 6, 1914. By June 1916, there were about 150 producing gas and 50 oil wells in the Augusta district. The discovery of oil in the Augusta area saw the growth of oil boom towns such as Gordon Heights, Haskins Camp, Millertown, Pure Oil Camp, Mid-Continent, Moyles, Pipe Yard, and Browntown.
They first discovered gas on August Kuster's land, which was actually right at where the Santa Fe and the Frisco crossed. So it's a V-shaped piece of land, and that's where they discovered gas. And so that was the beginning of it all. And then they began to find the wells, the oil wells south of here, and it was just south of us. And some of the pictures that we have of that piece of land, they said you could go 50 feet and there was another oil derrick, another wooden oil derrick, and another one. They were just practically on top of one another because of the amount of oil that they were finding. They brought in roustabouts they set up little towns like Browntown and Haskins Camp, and I don't know, there were just several little towns south of here, and they were very, they did very well. Browntown had one of the best schools in the area, and it was all because of the money that they were able to get from the oil.
This brought in lots of people that were looking for jobs, and it brought their families. And soon, oil camps were springing up south of Augusta, Haskins Camp and Browntown, which were kind of their own separate communities, but still part of Augusta, but they still had they had their own schools and things, but still would come into Augusta for supplies and such. And the railroad was bringing workers in to go to the oil fields. This also started all kinds of other businesses related to drilling oil. The population grew from 1,400 in 1915 to about 3,575 people in 1916, and it just continued to soar for about the next 2 decades. Oil drilling and refining was a major source of employment in Augusta for many years. There were 3 main refineries: the Lakeside, the Walnut Valley, and the White Eagle refineries. Later was the Saccone and Mobile refinery. Saccone closed in 1963, but Mobile continued until 1984. So this was really a major source of industry and income and employment for the people of Augusta for many years. And by 1920, the population had soared to about 10,000 people, which is more than the population of Augusta now. But that was primarily because of the oil industry. This industry also helped to support the community through the Depression. Even though it was difficult for many people, there were a lot of communities about the same size of Augusta that weren't making it. But because of that oil industry, it kept people employed and kept the city going.
In 1917, as the oil fields around Augusta are booming, 3 refineries were built by entrepreneurs: the Walnut Refinery, Lakeside Refinery, and the White Eagle Oil Company. The White Eagle Refinery was founded by L.L. Marcel. He is reported to have named the company after a Native American chief. An image of a white eagle became a company trademark. When first built, the refinery had the capacity for 2,000 barrels a day. It grew to a reported peak capacity in the 60s of more than 50,000 barrels per day. The refinery would have a few name and logo changes throughout the decades as companies emerged. From White Eagle to Standard Oil or Saccone when it was sold in the 1930s,
then to Saucony Vacuum when corporations merged. Saucony became Saucony Mobil Oil in 1955, eventually becoming Mobil Oil Company in 1966. In 1983, Mobil Oil announced it would officially close the Augusta refinery, affecting 400 refinery and pipeline employees in the area. It also affected Augusta's economy as it was a community supporter of arts and education and community development. The decision to close its doors was because of declining petroleum demand and surplus refining capacity. When the refinery closed, it was operating at 27,000 barrels of oil.
In the 1920s, the nation experienced the rise of a second incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan. Kansas and Butler County were no exceptions. The incarnation of the Klan, fueled by racism and anti-immigrant sentiment, began to find a foothold in Butler County communities. Along with El Dorado and Douglas, Augusta had a significant membership. The story goes that one of Augusta's prominent professionals was a state leader of the Klan.
In September of 1923, Augusta hosted a Klan statewide meeting, 6 weeks after Douglas held a large Klan-sponsored gathering. Area news reported the meeting starting with a parade beginning in the business district and going north on State Street. The parade ended at a large field north of Augusta. Once the parade concluded, an open-air meeting was held. Klan chapters from towns near Augusta sent several hundred members and representatives from Klan districts in south-central parts of Kansas as well.
According to one account, the Klan eventually grew out of favor when the Klan began to make home visits to unsuspecting Augusta residents. The purpose of these visits was to set straight persons the Klan felt were behaving in inappropriate ways. These surprise visits didn't sit well, and public Klan support began to wane.
We are fortunate to have a story that recollects how the Klan began to lose favor in Augusta. Burl Allison Jr., in his book about Augusta, he tells a story that was told to him by his father. In this story, he states that a farmer west of Augusta was eating supper one night with his family when they heard a knock at the door. The farmer opens the door, and in front of him were 6 white-robed persons. One of these people stated, "Come along with us. You haven't been doing things right lately. You need straightening out." The farmer was caught off guard. He wasn't sure what this was about, so he responded, "Well, let me get my hat." So he begins to reach behind the door, where he notices there is a double-barreled shotgun. So the farmer decides at the last minute, "I'm not going to grab my hat. I'm going to grab the shotgun." He points it at the group and tells them to leave. The hooded men are surprised, so they turn around and proceed down the drive. When the group was about halfway down the lane, as the story goes, the shotgun happens to go off, hitting one of the Klansmen in the rear. The Klansmen run. They jumped in their car and drove away, the wheels kicking up gravel. The story goes that for a time, a rather well-known Augustan walked around town with a limp.
July 13, 1924, a tornado struck the west portion of Augusta, damaging a total of 16 buildings, including the newly constructed high school, lumberyard, newspaper building, and the Catholic Church. State Street took the brunt of the damage. Almost every building was impacted. The street was littered with large trees and telephone poles. The Moyle apartment building, which was 5 stories at the time of the storm, was so heavily damaged that it lost its top 2 floors and today only has 3 stories. The oil fields to the west and south of Augusta were not unscathed. Derricks toppled over, and there was damage to oil tanks and lease houses. City damage was estimated to reach $1.5 million and about $500,000 in the oil fields alone. 1 fatality was reported and 3 persons were injured.
You know, we have a great school district. I think that's probably the biggest employer now is the school district. And I think that, there's still community pride, a good community involvement as far as our chamber and trying to promote events and things. We have a good ministerial alliance in our community with our churches and those organizations. So I think people personally, because I do work in Wichita, it's kind of nice to come home to the small town where it's familiar and you know people, and I think people feel comfortable with that.
Today we've explored the rich history of Augusta, spanning over 150 years.
Presently, Augusta is a thriving community of just under 10,000. Join us next time as we explore another story at the Kansas Crossroads.